Morning, Jeff. How are you? How's Las Vegas?
Las Vegas, only 107 today.
Oh my
Beautiful.
God. It's so cool in LA. It's 70, 71. It's a pleasure.
You got June gloom.
Exactly.
It's sunny today.
I had June gloom for many, many, many years.
Yeah, there's June gloom for sure, but not today. It came out pretty.
Do you have your puppy yet?
July 5th, I'm getting it. Sammy. So on the next class, I'll be holding him up so you can. He's literally this big.
What breed?
A Maltese puppy.
Ah.
Oh, how nice.
Very cute. Hopefully.
At least it's a non-shedder.
A non-shedder and very little and very
A lap dog.
Yeah, a lap dog. That's what I want.
They're cute.
I was told they were bred to sit at the feet of royalty.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so he'll be very, but it'll be nice to have. I hope. I'm sure it'll be great.
Yeah,
It'll
well,
be great.
Ruth is showing her dog. Oh, he's so cute. That's adorable. What's his name, Ruth? But you need to unmute to tell us. You're muted. I'm going to start in one more minute. I'll give.
Rabbi Susan,
Yes.
can you confirm, did Rabbi Bo have a baby?
Yes, he had a baby boy. He named him Simon Harris Shapiro.
Oh, how fun.
Very fancy. The dog's name is Candy.
Oh, sweet.
And she wasn't bred to sit at the feet of royalty. She was bred to sit on my lap.
Oh, that's even better.
Great.
I'm sure this dog will sit on my lap too. So yes, Rabbi Shapiro had a baby, and it was very funny because we had a clergy meeting on Monday, and he said that the baby's due on Tuesday, and my wife can't take it anymore, so we're inducing the baby Tuesday. She couldn't wait. And then Monday night at 11 p.m., we got an email saying, well, the baby didn't want to wait, and he was born on his own. So, but we haven't seen, I think tomorrow he's going to do his class, but I haven't really seen him since then,
But he was on
yesterday.
What is Rabbi Shapiro's email?
It's Rabbi Shapiro, I think, at wbtla.org.
Okay.
Yeah. So
He did class yesterday.
Oh, good. So he's already,
Yeah.
so it says 14 participants, but I don't see them. But anyway, whatever.
Rabbi
Susan Ehrlich, you're completely invisible, just so you know. Yes.
Rabbi Shapiro's email address is Rabbi Bo Shapiro.
Oh, Rabbi Bo
Good.
Shapiro. Sorry.
Thank you.
BEAU.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, all right. We'll start. This was I was going to teach my Torah portion, this Torah portion from last week on Friday, and my gardeners accidentally snipped my internet wire. I didn't know what it was, but I had nothing, so I couldn't teach. And then at the same time, I was scammed by a scammer at the very same time. So I thought it was part of the hack. They called me and told me I was hacked and put me through this whole stressful thing. And I just want to warn you, because then after this, somebody else told me it had happened to them, but no one shared it. If they tell you that your cloud has been, somebody has infiltrated your cloud and that people are using it all over the country, and you need to, when I think about it now, it sounds ridiculous, but at the time I was like hysterical. You have to buy a gift card. Which now, this gift card now they're using at Apple, and they actually sent me a receipt. You'll be totally reimbursed. They sent me a fake receipt with all of the logo of Apple and everything. And I actually bought a $500 gift card and gave them the information. That's how terrible it was. But then they told me that now they got half of it out. I need to buy $2,000 worth of gift cards to finish it. And then I went, oh my God, I'm being hacked. I'm being scammed.
Of course.
So yeah, of course now. It was so real. I can't tell you. Just be careful.
Did you get the 500 back?
I tried to return it. They wouldn't take it, but I'm contesting it on the credit card. So anyway.
The credit card should give it to you back because that
Yeah.
happened to us once with Walmart.
Okay, so good. So hopefully they're going to take care of it. And hi, Brad. So anyway,
Was it just one person talking to you on the phone?
no,
Was
it was her. And then she said, let me get my technical advisor to talk to you. And then it was the two of them. He says, oh, they're really smart, but we're smarter. And my
Right.
internet went out in the middle of it, having nothing to do with them because my gardener cut the wire. But I said, oh my God, my internet's out. And they said, oh, that's probably them. They've infiltrated your phone.
Oh my God, what a
Oh,
consequence.
geez.
I mean, I
Susan.
thought I was being watched through the internet. I had no idea.
Oh my God. All right.
So sad.
So I tell you, even though I'm embarrassed because I don't want anyone else to fall for it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with a blessing because it's so nice to see you all. Baruch
Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kichanu Atah v'tzivanu la'aseh Divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So this was last week's Torah portion, but it's so timely and unbelievable. And I don't know if you got the text because we really want to look at the text today. And I printed out the text, and it's also if you have a Tanakh or you have a Torah, a Chumash. Chumash is the word for the 5 books because Chumash comes from Chamesh, which means 5. It's called a Chumash. It's Parshat Shalach Lecha, which would be Leviticus 13. Leviticus 13. And some of it we have to look at the Hebrew because the Hebrew was a little different from the English. Oh, Don Levy actually put it up. If you want to take, is it in the chat? Could be in the chat. Maybe he put it.
Yeah, it looks like it.
So you can take a look or you can print it or whatever. This is the famous story of Moses sending the 12 spies, it's called, but really the word is scouts, into the land. Now, it was this event and the golden calf that ultimately was the reason that the Israelites stayed in the desert for 40 years. It didn't take 40 years to cross the desert. Maybe it took a year, not even a year, because we know they got to Sinai in 7 weeks from Egypt, because that's Shavuot. And then they were crossing the desert. We don't know how long, maybe a year, but it's certainly not 40 years when they reached the border. Now, they had already built this beautiful Mishkan, this portable, temple that they were taking with them. They had gotten the 10 Commandments. They had all these miracles. They had the manna. They'd had a lot of miracles already in the desert. And the feeling of God watching over them and being with them. When they reached this border, they were there, ready to go in. So, they could have gone in except for. So the first verse says, and God spoke to Moses saying, send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers, you shall send a man, each one a chieftain among them. So right away, there's an interesting Hebrew word, and I've read this from Rabbi Artson from, American Jewish University, the rabbi up there. The word for scout or spy is not the usual word. In Hebrew, a spy is leragel, to walk around. Regel comes from that word, and to spy out. This word is vayaturu. It comes from the word latur, which actually in modern Hebrew means to be a tourist, to tour. A tayar is a tourist in Hebrew. So right away, what was the mission of the people? What's the difference between spying and touring? What's the difference in your opinion?
One, you're trying to get information for somebody else.
Okay, but what are you looking for when you're usually spying?
For
The enemy.
arsenals, for weaponry, for defenses, for warfare preparations. Whereas tourists go to enjoy the fruits of the land and the people and to see what it produces.
Exactly. So one is actually looking for the dangers and one is looking for the pleasures. And the word in Hebrew implies, even though I just read this interpretation, I never heard this before, but it says Latour, and they use the word Latour like 12 times, ironically, and there are 12 of these scouts. And he sends them to look out on the land. And then they name all of them, which we don't have to read. And Moses, by the way, there was one of the men, two of the men stand out. One was named Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. And some commentary in Midrash say, though it's not in the text, that he was Miriam's husband. So I like to portray Miriam as an unmarried, powerful woman. Some Midrashim or commentaries say that Kalev, was Miriam's husband. And the other one, his name was Hoshea, the son of Ben Nun, but Moses changed his name to Yehoshua or Joshua Ben Nun. So we don't know why he changed his name, but the Yud, as we know in Hebrew, is always the idea of the presence of God. Hey, or Yud means God's presence. So Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. So he changed his name. So Rashi, who we love, the medieval commentary, says he changed his name so God would be with him so that he wouldn't be under the evil influence. It says Moses changes Joshua's name so God will protect him. May God save you from the malign influence of the other scouts. That's Rashi. I don't know how he would know that it would be malign influence because he's supposedly picking the princes of each tribe. He picked the princes, the heads of each tribe. I think it's interesting though. I was thinking about this. When you're the head of a tribe and you're a prince and you're sent to go and, suss out a land, whatever the word he used, you kind of have a military mission in mind. That's what happened. They had a military mission in mind. It wasn't a benign, it was like, we're warriors, we're going to go in there, we're going to, look at all of the military possibilities because they were supposed to go in and conquer the land. So then Moses sent them to scout out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up into the Negev. It's so amazing because these exact same places still exist in Israel. And go into the hill country and see what kind of country it is, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees or not. I love that they talk about trees. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land, because now is the time of the season of ripe grapes. So what were they supposed to look for? Two things. So two big topics, but what do you think? What do you think was the purpose? Does it seem like it's conquest or to live in? I'm curious what you think.
One follows the other. They know they've got 8 tribes to overcome before they can fully utilize the land, so that the first concern is always the development of a safe encampment by taking over the territories necessary. And then long term, since it took 100 years to overcome the land, ultimately to use it for cultivation purposes, grazing.
So yes, though we know archaeologically that did not happen. that they did not go in there and kill all the people and take over the land. They actually, first of all, some archaeologists say that some Israelites did not even leave. Some of Jacob's family didn't leave, and some stayed behind, and some went to Egypt. And so there was a reunification that happened. This is an archaeological theory, but also that because they find so many little idols and little pagan artifacts in the land, they know that the Canaanites lived there too. I mean, they may have come in and taken over the government, but they didn't wipe out the people for sure. They lived with them, and we know that they probably married them and, intermarried and lived together. And Judaism had a lot of pagan elements in that ancient Israel time for a while. Okay, so they went up and they scouted the land, and they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes. How many of you have seen that image from Israel with like the spies carrying the poles with the beautiful grapes? That's from this text, And they brought pomegranates and figs. And that's where they took the fruits from. Okay. They stayed there for 40 days. It's such a magical number in the Torah for some reason. I don't know why 40 is so prevalent, unless it just means long, but it's, 40 days. Everything is 40 days. The flood is 40 days. Moses being up on the mountain is 40 days. This is 40 days. It's just a lot of 40 days. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel, and they brought back to them, and they showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, and here we see this beautiful, who would like to read this? I think Talia, you have it, right? You want to read it?
Sure, from the report of the spies?
Yeah.
Okay. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran.
Yeah.
Paran, at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit."
So, I just want to stop and say, that's such a beautiful image, milk and honey. And we don't hear it anywhere except for here in the Torah. It's beautiful to say milk and honey. It's just, it gives such a lush, beautiful idea of fertility and sweetness at the same, and growth and nature at the same time. Continue.
However, the people who dwell in the land are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there, the Amalekites.
Right.
The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The
Hittites,
the
Jebusites,
and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan.
Okay, so Anak, yeah, did somebody want to say something? No, Anak, I think means, I just want to look at this, but I think it's in a reference to giants, that the people they talk about the Anakites we saw the people of Anak there, they're giants. That word Anak means very big, like a giant. So right away, they feel intimidated, and then they go further. Well, there's an argument, and this is what we're going to talk about for quite a while. Does somebody else have the text that wants to continue reading? Does anybody else have it? You have it, Risa?
I have it.
Want to read it? But Caleb quieted the people.
Wait a minute, I'm just. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Then the men who had gone up with him said, "We cannot attack that people, for they are stronger than we are."
Okay, so I want to stop because in the Hebrew, the word for attack really is to go up also, la'alot, which means we cannot overcome that people, for they are stronger. And the word mimenu can mean than we are or than he is, meaning they may have been saying they're stronger than God. They're stronger than God. They are giant. This is what they saw, giant. And the people totally believed it and panicked. So Risa, continue.
By the way, just for the heck of it, I'm following the text also in the women's commentary.
Yeah.
And they use the word emissaries instead of spies.
Scouts or spies.
So that gives you the whole feeling that they were looking to live there.
So emissary, that's a great translation. This word, so an emissary is completely different than a scout even, or a spy, because in the JPS it says scout.
Right. So it's up for conversation, that word.
Yeah. Okay. Continue.
Okay. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had scouted out, saying, "The land through which we have traveled and scouted is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim."
Okay, Nephilim were these beings that we see in the book of Genesis that were like powerful
fallen angels.
Yeah, right. Well, angels
Giants.
copulated or had sex or had children with human women, and so their descendants are these like powerful, physical beings that could never be defeated.
Right.
Okay, continue.
And we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them.
So here's the thing. Now, what I want to point out is, if you go further into the Torah in the book, the next parsha, Balak, it talks about how they actually perceive the Israelites. They said, we seem like grasshoppers to ourselves, and we seem that way to them. And if you look in the chapter, 22, it says, Moab was alarmed because the people, this is about Israel. Moab dreaded the Israelites, and Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will lick clean all that is about us, and as an ox licks up the grass of the field." So they were terrified of the Israelites, and the Israelites were terrified of them. So I want to talk about when we look at things, how objective are we, and how much of ourselves do we bring to the table in situations? Now, what does that say about their mentality when they even went out there? Or what did they see? Why did they think that? How could they know that? Let's just speculate what kind of thought process or what kind of mentality these leaders, these princes had at that point. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
One of the things you see, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, Talia.
Oh, am I unmuted?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, you're unmuted, yeah.
So it seems as though their own personal insecurities or fears are coming out, whereas the two that perceived it differently maybe just had a little bit more faith, or maybe felt like, God is, on their side.
Okay, any other thoughts about what their mentality was when they, Susan?
I just thought of this. I hadn't thought of it before. They were elders. Maybe their age, they didn't want to, when they saw these big giants, they didn't want to go into to fight it. And of course, their faith was not there. But Caleb and Joshua were young guys. So, I just thought of that. There's a age disparity. And for armies and the like, they rely on young guys. My father was classified as old for World War II because he was 32. So,
okay, but yes, also, were the people giants? Well,
if
you see somebody in a hoodie, is he a mugger? Were the people giants? Or, I mean, what do we see when we look at people? Do we project right away that
Yeah.
they are something because of how they look or what we bring to it?
It certainly
Anyone?
comes,
Okay, Jeff.
One of the things you see is you have to understand the Israelite population at the time. You had a few elders who were obviously more knowledgeable, not only in life, but in experience. And they were chosen because of their wisdom by Moses and God to lead their tribes. And the rest of the people from Mount Sinai to this point were followers. We will do what we are told, and they are easily influenced.
Okay, there doesn't say elders anywhere.
Oh, okay, then that
Doesn't
was,
say elders. It says chieftain.
Chieftains.
Chieftain,
Okay.
and in Hebrew, the word is nasi, which means prince.
okay,
Right.
I take it back.
Princes, they were nobles. I mean, one of the most famous ones was, what's his name? The guy who walked, Nachshon,
Yeah,
who walked into the sea.
See,
He was considered a prince, you know, of his tribe, and he was very brave. So I don't think he was sending the Alta conquerors. He was
okay, I take it
sending-
back then. That just,
Yeah, I mean, I think he was sending the warriors,
yeah, okay.
but
you have 10 people who are presenting either by collusion or by their own intention a story of fear that obviously affected the entire people to be supportive of their position.
right.
You have two people, Joshua and Caleb, and it's amazing because Caleb was more ethical and noble than Joshua was, but yet he's never mentioned again. He was the strongest advocate of God that they could go into the land.
Okay, so I agree with you. So why do you think these men brought back this negative report? These were princes, these were leaders. What? Oh, no, that's something else. Somebody said you got mail. I thought somebody said they were male.
God
No.
is sending a message, right?
No, does anybody have any thoughts about why they would go there and bring back this negative report? What did, you know, does anybody have any ideas before I?
Well, later. they
Miriam,
did the
Miriam.
self-image.
Miriam, unmute yourself. You have to unmute. Press the little mute button. You're muted. I can't hear you. You're talking, but I can't hear you.
Well, can I talk then?
Yes, go ahead, Cassandra. Go ahead.
Just thinking that maybe they were passive, even though they were princes, they were passive and they were satisfied in staying where they were, and they weren't as adventuresome.
They weren't as adventuresome. And what had most of their life been? What had most of their, I mean, if we say that, you know, that your whole psyche is formed in your childhood and your teens or whatever, where were their psyches formed? As what?
As slaves.
As slaves. So, Ruth, did you want to say something?
No, I was going to say they had a slave mentality.
Meaning that they didn't have, yeah, go ahead. What does that mean?
They waited for orders. They weren't used to thinking for themselves. All they could see was this was going to be everyone for themselves. Nobody was going to tell them what to do. They would have to go in there. They would have to cut down trees to establish a village, try and, it was going to be hard work.
Going to be hard work, and it was going to be, they were going to have to also fight to some degree, so they'd have to lead armies. So they, yes, Miriam.
You gave me a new thought. Of course, I've read this many times, as most of us have. We're very familiar with the story, as most of us are. Nevertheless, you emphasize the fact that these were princes. Therefore, they were the heads of each tribe that was chosen. And there's an enormous dichotomy here because they acted like anything but leaders. They led tribes, and yet being in this position, they forgot that they were people of leadership. And the rabbis say The most important thing is that they had no faith in God. If they had faith in their God, then they would have known that he would have led them to victory in spite of giants. But they were grasshoppers in their own eyes before they became anything else. They were firstly grasshoppers. Secondly, they were leaders of their tribe.
Exactly. And because they saw themselves as grasshoppers, they saw other people as grasshoppers, or they responded. They thought that other people saw them as grasshoppers.
Yes.
Is what I meant to say. So they projected their own sense of identity or their weaknesses that other people were seeing them as well. And it made them totally fearful, and they didn't want to take the leadership. They didn't want to move forward in this whole journey that they had been on. So I think about today, people seeing people not for who they are, but who we are. You know, I put that as my title, that sometimes we project things on people, or ideas or behaviors or dangers on people because of our own fears or our own sense of inadequacy, or we were afraid in our lives, and so we believe stereotypes and we don't really see what's going on. And I think, you know, that has been a huge suffering and pain for African Americans in this country, that, you know, people see this color of their skin and that's all they see. They don't see anything beyond it. And whatever people's own feelings about that may be, they project it on the other person. Miriam.
To bring it further, I'll just say one more sentence.
No.
Today, in today's world, we are visibly seeing leadership on television on a daily basis of a leader who does exactly that. And I don't mean to be political, people might disagree, but all his ills, all his shortcomings, of which there are myriads and too numerous, he projects on others. And this is not my thought. This is the thought of my therapist friends who say he can never be reached. We have people that we work with that can never be reached. He cannot.
Well, we don't have to talk about that, but we can talk about people who don't want there to be the epidemic or the coronavirus, so they're just pretending it doesn't exist and not wearing their masks and going to crowds and pretending and saying you're crazy, or even threatening people who say you have to put on a mask because they're so committed to their point of view that they're willing to fight about it. They actually shot somebody, some store clerk, who said you can't come in without a mask. This is nothing. This is like, it could be anyone. I don't want to get into the president. I'm not a fan, but I don't think this is the place. But you bring yourself to it, and you don't want to see, sometimes we really are blinded. So I don't even know if they were giants. I don't even know if they were powerful or strong, because we don't really know what these scouts were seeing, because Caleb and Joshua said, oh, we're well able to overcome it. There's not a problem. We can go and do this. And everybody else, the others 10 said no. And then what happened? All the congregation raised up a loud cry, and the people wept that night. So people immediately believed the worst. So that Jewish quality is pretty old. We're always believe the worst.
The essence of this has two elements from at least a point of view. The first is, in their travels to this point, they've seen 10 miracles, and yet the faith of the people irresponsibly is not able to look at 10 miracles and believe that God has been and will be their protector. Only Caleb and Joshua had this necessary faith and essence to allow them to survive the 40 years of wandering in the desert, because they did maintain that degree of faith in God's protection and God's guidance.
Yes, but I agree with you, but I also think they had clear eyes. They had open minds and open hearts because, you know, having faith is fantastic, but we need faith, but we also need to be able to clearly look at things and try to be honest about what we're seeing. And this is how far back these Israelites went to. They wept and they grumbled against Moses and they said, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or that we had died, would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said, let's choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Can you believe this, these people?
That was God's last straw.
That was God's last straw.
And Absolutely. He said, you guys are done. Anybody from 20 to 60 is going to die in the desert over the next 40 years because you are not ready, you are not matured, you are not seasoned, you are not strong enough, not only in faith and belief in my protection, but to protect yourselves and to fight for what you need.
Okay, I agree with you. And that's kind of a very classical understanding, but psychologically, we could really say you're too damaged. You're too scarred. You're too traumatized. You're just, you can't cope. You can't cope with anything more. And you can't even, again, you can't even appreciate or see these 10 miracles as we're talking about, because now they're romanticizing
their past.
Slavery. Speaking of that, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think you know that. I think, what is it, Netflix or one of these services, they pulled out Gone with the Wind right now. They've taken it off.
Several movies that had.
But this one romanticized slavery. Just like these, if these Israelites were going to make a movie, they would have made it a beautiful movie about being back in Egypt. You know, they're fantasizing something that didn't even exist. And to say this horrible thing to imagine Moses and Aaron and Miriam hearing this. By the way, according to the Midrash, which I love at times, the women did not die out, but they all went into the land because when it came time to make the golden calf, they refused to give their gold and their jewelry to make this idol. They said, we're not going to participate. And so they were rewarded, according to the Midrash, by going into the land. They all went. And by being given the holiday of Rosh Chodesh, which is a woman's holiday of celebrating the new moon. It was a holiday for women. So, but it's not in the text, but it's a nice midrash, because if the sin of the golden calf was, you know, the first straw, and this was the last straw, and we know that they sent men, and the men are speaking for their wives, because they say our wives and little ones will become prey. So we don't really know if the women were crying too. Maybe they did get in, but they asked to go. They even want another leader. Can you imagine? It's not just that they're telling Moses, take us back. They're saying, we want to get rid of you after all that he did for them. These Israelites are really, I don't like them. They're terrible. Yes. Okay, Merle.
I think the big thing here is, you know, you talked about fear. You got all these people, and then 12 people are chosen to go be whatever language, whatever commentary.
Emissaries, scouts,
right.
Tourists, whatever.
They're like wondering, well, what are they going to come back and tell us? Or I trust one, but I don't trust 3, 4, or 5 or whatever. And I think that was then, and it's now. People don't trust something new because the fear is, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be like what I want, what somebody else wants? How am I going to adapt to it? It's then and it's now, and it's like a social work thing. Like, how am I going to fit into this new society? And that is this new society, what am I going to have to do to stay part of it? And is it going to work for me and my family versus the guy in the other tent?
Good. Yes, thank you. Valerie.
You know what, this story comes to mind of my grandparents, who left Russia. They didn't know where they were. They went to deepest, darkest Africa. They didn't have the internet. They got on a boat and they went. But that's because they weren't coming from slavery, but they didn't see
Poverty.
They didn't have much of a choice, and they weren't afraid.
They weren't afraid to do
We're
it.
not afraid. Yeah.
Well, they could have come from pogroms. When did they come?
Yeah, they came the same as Ruth's parents, you know.
Okay.
Lithuanians came in the early 1900s. Yeah,
1910.
Pogroms then, late.
Yeah, but still, they knew they were going to a place where they didn't know where they were going.
It's very brave when you think about our grandparents and great grandparents to just pick up and go to another land where they didn't speak the language, didn't know anything, and just went blindly.
That's right.
I think it's pretty brave. Talia.
When you had shared about preconceived ideas about others that may look different or dress differently, I think about how there's this amazing Mark Twain quote, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." So like that whole idea of staying in your corner kind of fosters bigotry and misperceptions and limited freedom.
Yes, and limited vision and limited ideas of people. I mean, I went to college. I mean, I don't know, I guess it still exists. And I remember one of the girls in my dorm saying, "Wow, I've never met a Jew before."
Yeah.
You know, and we all have stories about, "Oh, where are your horns?" I actually met one young guy, this is like in the 90s, who said, "They still exist? I thought they were only in the Bible." How small is his world not to know that when there's a Hanukkah party in the White House? You know, how small is this person's world? So maybe these people had such small minds, they had a mentality that was so limited, they couldn't even imagine broadening it and going into the land. Ruth. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that you can bring that forward. Look at the people who wouldn't leave Germany or Russia or Lithuania and others who did. You had exactly the same thing. It's a remake of history.
Could be, yes. Though I think in Germany, they just didn't believe anything bad would happen, as opposed to being afraid. Well, they didn't want to leave because everything they had was there, but also they just couldn't fathom that this modern country would go to the level that it did. I don't think anybody fathomed that. So, okay, so then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly. I think that's, this fall on your face thing, I'm kind of curious what that really means. Is it like, what does that mean to you? They fell on their faces before everybody. And let me go on. Joshua and Caleb were among those who had spied out the land. They tore their clothes and said to the congregation, "The land which we passed through to spy out or to scout out is exceedingly good. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. It'll be good for us. Their protection is removed from them and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." And all the congregation said to stone them with stones, but God stopped them. So basically they were going to stone them for saying we could go in. So these people were hysterical. And I do think about somebody who shot somebody because they said wear a mask, or beat somebody up in a grocery store for wearing a mask. It's like, I don't want you to interfere with my delusion or vision that I have of the world, and I'd rather kill you than change my mind. Can you, and that's not just then. We know that that happens now. If you want to think another way and it threatens people, they would rather kill you than change their minds. And then God said, I'm going to kill them. I
Susan,
will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a greater nation and a mightier. And God basically offered Moses, your descendants, it'll all come from you. I'm done with these people.
Susan,
And yes,
Susan,
Risa.
I think it's very important that it says that God appeared to all the Israelites in the tent of meeting, because
Yes.
he rarely does that. It's
You're right.
usually
I'm sorry, I skipped that over
one-on-one.
that. I skipped over that. You're
Yeah,
right.
I think it's very important because he was very, or God was very upset. Not so much that Moses and Aaron were being spurned, but that God himself was being spurned. And so he let them know hard and heavy.
You're right. You're right. God appeared to all of them.
Yeah, it doesn't
And
do that very often.
yes, he doesn't. And he spoke to Moses, but they may have all heard it.
They all heard.
You know, I will strike them with a pestilence. Now, I find, and you know, I think that, you know, these are writers of the Torah. I don't think that this came from Sinai. I find Moses's argument, which he's used before, very curious and an interesting portrayal of God in the Torah at this point, because what is Moses's reason for not letting God kill all the people? It'll make God look bad in the world. He says, then the Egyptians will hear of it, for you brought up this people in your might from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land that they have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people. And for you, O Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands over them. Now, if you kill this people as one man, then the nations who have heard your fame will say, it is because the Lord was not able to bring these people into the land that he swore to give to them, that he has killed them in the wilderness. So if you kill them, then people will say, well, you couldn't bring them into the land, so you killed them.
This is the second time he has appealed.
Second time.
Yeah.
First time was with
with the
Sodom and
golden
Gomorrah.
calf.
Yeah.
Excuse me, my hand has been up a long time.
Oh, Miriam, so sorry. Go ahead.
It's all right, dear. I just don't want to blurt in. I find this situation different than all the other situations that were mentioned, such as our ancestors leaving Russia, coming or wherever they left, Poland, any other country, coming to a land that they knew nothing about, and especially had no idea how to speak the language, etc. I don't think it's analogous to any people leaving a homeland, which has been good to them, even in Germany. I'm not talking about the shtetl life, and leaving it because potentially you think something horrible could happen, and therefore somebody stayed. I think this is unique. For this reason, they were not leaving and going peacefully to another country. They were not leaving their lives behind to make a new life. They were leaving with the thought in mind, and I am not condoning the 10 spies one moment, but this was in their head. They would go to war, perhaps lose their own mishpacha, their own children, etc., in order to conquer the land they're going to, and then take it over.
Yes.
So I think it's unique, like no other group leaving it.
I agree with you, and you're right. Everybody else, we left for good or bad, and we came somewhere, and we didn't have to conquer the land, though we did have to conquer a lot of other things to survive. But there was this promise. There had been these miracles, one after the other, the crossing of the sea, the 10 Commandments, over and over and over and over, and still they absolutely had no belief
No,
in
that
the
it would be okay. It had been okay through all of these, extraordinary experiences. And yet they still didn't believe it would be okay. And they still were too afraid to go forward. And that's what Joshua and Caleb are saying. Don't be worried. God will bless us. God will protect us. Don't reject this. And they were hysterical because of their own psyches, which is what I think. Their own psyches could not handle it. And part of it could have been, I will die in battle. I agree with you, Miriam. They could be fear, oh, well, I'm going to have to fight and I'm not a fighter, or I don't know, we could die in the war. So I agree with you. But to suddenly romanticize slavery and Egypt and go back and say, we seem so extreme and so hysterical. Though I do think, again, that Moses's argument is curious. What do you think? And he says, and then he has to smooth God's ego. He says, oh, remember, you are so great and you are slow to anger and abounding in love and forgiving iniquity and transgression. So then he says, please pardon these people according to the greatness of your love.
I think isn't he projecting onto God his own feelings, because they're rejecting him as well. And his reputation is going to be ruined and his self-esteem is in jeopardy.
But he's offered to be the ancestor of a whole new people. But he says, God, forgive them. I mean, Moses seems to be, this is really sacrilegious, more compassionate, less harsh, or seems to understand these people better.
God is in essence the world's first and greatest PR motivator. And Moses uses that against him on multiple occasions to save the people.
You're right, he does use that.
The difference is, though he couldn't salve God's ego, what happened is that God, like a parent, said, this time there are consequences.
There are consequences,
I will
but not killing
allow.
them. Right.
He realizes the mistake that he made, that these people are definitely not seasoned enough to have the courage necessary to become a people. And yet those from 20 to 60 are all going to die. And the new generation over 40 years will develop toughness and hopefully satisfy the needs of the people that God wishes to create.
Yes,
Talia, just the whole idea of saying they're not courageous. I think there's so many people that get used to their comfort zone and they don't want to change it because change is hard. And some people use Tide and don't realize that Procter & Gamble still does animal testing. It's like, it goes on and on. It's like you just do things because you're used to it. And to change your mindset, let alone where you live. I mean, my mom was just sharing with me, Penina was just sharing with me that my dad's uncle.
Right. He came with his father, with my father-in-law to Israel. And they said, oh my God, what is this? It's all mud and swamps and thieves. And the Arabs had at the time free entry to the cities and everything. And he said, what kind of country is this? And he went back to Czechoslovakia and the Nazis got him. And
yeah. My friend,
my father-in-law stayed, opened the butcher shop, started a life, brought his family in. Of course, he had to bribe a British guard on the port to let them in. That's another thing, that it wasn't even our country at the time. We were to the mercy of other empires. We were a colony, but my father-in-law stayed. Then that's it. And
my whole thing though is that whole idea of, there, like what Gandhi said, there's enough for everybody's need, but not everyone's greed, right? So if we all just had one car, one house that housed reasonably our family, we could house everyone and redistribute the wealth a little bit, but people don't want that. They're used to collecting cars or collecting even their art, it's a tough one. It's a tough one to let go of what you're used to.
even when what they were used to, but this is even more extreme because what they want to go back to or what they want to cling to was horrible. So it's a very, we're able to fool ourselves and romanticize things. But I wanted to point out something else. God says, Vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha. I have pardoned you according to your word. And this is what we say at the end of Yom Kippur, this quote. Vayomer Adonai, I forgave you according to your words. In other words, your requests for forgiveness, I have forgiven you. And that's what we sing at the very, very end of Yom Kippur, straight from here. But God takes the 40 days that the Israelites spies or scouts or emissaries were out there and turns them into the 40 years of wandering. That's why they wandered for 40 years, because they were gone for 40 days. And he said, you're all going to die here. But it's like, I think about an immigrant generation who never really adjusts, and then their kids become very Americanized, right? Like I had immigrant grandparents. My grandmother never really learned to read English. She spoke, Hebrew, but Yiddish was her main language. She never really assimilated. We see that a lot. And then my father, totally American, on both sides of my family. It's like they had to bring up a new warrior generation in the desert. A generation who understood freedom, independence, responsibility, that this old country, the old country being Egypt, could not leave it behind. They brought it with them, whatever that slavery. Don't forget, they had been there for 400 years. We can only imagine their lifestyle, their customs, their way of thinking, their fear. I can imagine having huge fear, having inherited that, being under taskmasters and punishment for all those generations. And we know you inherit now. We've told genetically you inherit trauma. They were just too immersed in that broken slave society and mentality to embrace going forward. And so psychologically, it made sense that they couldn't handle it, but their children, who would be raised to be fighters and thinkers and whatever, would be the ones to go into the land. So, and then, actually the Israelites after that say, no, we don't want to stay here. We'll fight. And they try to fight, and they go and they try to fight the Amalekites and the Canaanites, and they lose. They say, we're ready, but they completely lose. And what is very interesting, because we're going to end soon in a couple minutes, when they went to fight, we're going to fight, and then they went up and they didn't take the ark with them. They didn't take the ark with them. And this is the first time that I've seen so we know that when they went to battle, they always took the ark with the 10 commandments with them, because that was like bringing God with them. And when they went up to fight this time, they didn't take the ark, and they still thought they knew what they were doing, and they didn't, and they lost. And then they died. If you were afraid of dying, they ended up dying in this ridiculous war without God's guidance.
They were told not to make an attempt at war, right, or to enter the land. So they denied God's instruction again. Exactly. And they were punished in the appropriate fashion, like the other malcontents will be.
Right. But what so this is a fascinating just chapter in the Torah, because it's the reason. Some people say, why did they wander for 40 years? I think some people think, well, it took them that long to get there, but that wasn't the case at all. But this idea of seeing people as grasshoppers because you feel like a grasshopper, to me, is like the real lesson of this Torah portion, that we have to stop projecting our own fears and our own, psyches onto other people, and try to see people for who they are. And what we will end up finding out is they're they're very similar to us in the basic ways in terms of being human and vulnerable, because the Moabites and the Israelites saw each other in the exact same way. They both projected. Both of them were afraid, and both of them thought the other ones were gigantic warriors. Just imagine if we could approach our enemies like that and make peace, because we really all want the same thing. How different.
Rabbi Nanus?
Yes.
One thing that's really interesting on this topic that I read, I think it's a concept from Jung, but oftentimes the thing that you fear and hate about another person is a repressed part of yourself.
Yeah.
And so in looking at your enemy, quote unquote, and the things that you hate about your enemy, look in your heart. And this is really hard and painful, but I've had to do it myself. And look in yourself and say, what do I have in common with that person that I hate? What about is in my soul that I'm not owning, that it's more easy to project onto them? And if you look at a very easy example for us to understand, the Third Reich, the Germans were wallowing in self-loathing given their economic and military defeats. And so to retrieve their own self-esteem, they took all of their self-loathing and projected it onto us. And so I think if we want to heal the world, what we really have to do is look at our enemy and say, what of me am I scapegoating them for? And it's painful and it's difficult, but I think for myself, when I've done that in my own life, it's been the most productive for me being able to treat everyone fairly.
Thank you. I think this is a beautiful way to end. And I wish you all a lovely week. And
return to Egypt.
Shabbat Shalom a little early. And is there any topic that people are interested in? I mean, I wanted to do this because I didn't do it on Friday, but I'm not going to do Torah portions most of the time. Is there anything you're really burning to study about or learn or discuss?
Oh, I have an idea.
Go ahead.
I know that in Judaism, it's, we're not supposed to try to define God because we kind of limit and contain him. But I'm curious, what are people's definitions of God, or what does that mean to you?
Okay, that's a good one. Thank you. Risa, I'm hearing your whole conversation. What did you?
I'm sorry, I thought I was muted.
That's okay.
Stanley and I are getting into a conversation here about verse 4, Vayomru ish el achiv nitna rosh v'nashuva. That's Mitzrayma. That's the phrase that says, let's go back to Egypt. Yeah. So I'm looking, and in the translation, in the women's commentary, it says, and I don't understand it, Stanley's still working on it. The Hebrew phrase can also mean, let us appoint a leader, indicating that the Israelites are ready to replace Moses and return to Egypt under new leadership.
Yes, I said that.
Yeah, that's very important.
We mentioned that, I think. But I'm going to stop now because it's after 1 o'clock.
Susan, can I just say one thing? You asked the question.
Wait. Yeah.
That's an alternative.
Another class.
It's a weak alternative.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Yes.
You asked the question what we're interested in, and very subjectively, I'm going to answer. We can discuss God. We can discuss ethics. We can discuss all these wonderful aspects of Judaism.
Right.
But we do not go to the text as people, as a group of people, as people right here. We do not go to the Bible. This gives us an opportunity to go directly to the text.
Yeah.
To know what we're talking about. And therefore, I would rather not discuss subjects with you that we can discuss without you. We need you to bring us to the direct text, of which most of us are ignorant.
Okay, well, if we talk about God, we're definitely going to look at the texts because there's so many discussions and discussions of
but
God.
we end up saying, if you don't believe in God, that's okay. If you're an ethical person, or you don't believe in God, you don't believe in God. I personally am not interested in whether believe in God or not. I don't feel, to me, That is the essence of Judaism.
No, I
The
agree.
essence of Judaism is how you treat your fellow man.
Won't
And that
disagree
we
with
get,
you.
and that we get from the Bible.
I totally agree with you. Okay.
Judaism,
So do I, by the way.
Judaism by definition is an action-oriented religion.
That's
Mhm.
right.
We know.
You know
It is deed and
what
not
you
creed.
do to act out the ethical behavior that the Torah has described as the best way for people to
Exactly.
live with each other.
Absolutely.
So
I agree.
unless your actions reflect an ethical basis, and it doesn't have to be Judaism's ethical basis, because the ethical basis of every religion has merit in its behavior between people.
Yes, but I think it's interesting to look at the text and say in between all of these beautiful ethical teachings are a lot of like neurotic behaviors
A
Yeah,
lot of
that's-
by the Israelites and the patriarchs
of
and
punishment.
matriarchs.
And by
Punishment.
us too.
And God is like very interesting because, and you know, the thing about studying about God is that if you look at the Torah and then you look at the prophets and then you look at the Talmud, God is completely different personality and it sort of evolves. I think it elevates itself. The idea of God elevates as we develop as a civilization of Judaism. And certainly the God of today, as Jews view it, for most of us, is not the same as in the Torah for most part. But that's a good topic, and I'll try to work on that for next week.
What about
Thank
great?
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Susan.